Matt, I guess we're gonna talk a little bit about light today, I'm assuming, right?
Yep. Perfect.
All right, man. Well, good. Well, I gotta, so let me just sort of even the score here. I'm gonna throw some of these bad boys on there.
There we go.
So I do have a question for you. I've got these yellow ones, and then I've also got a pair of these red ones. And is it just because I'm being cool one way or the other, or is there some supposed difference in which one I'm supposed to be using right now?
Yeah. So the difference is that one is blocking more light than the other. So the red ones, they're darker. They're blocking all of the blue and into the green light range. And so basically what that does is it makes us more tired more quickly.
Okay. So I should wear yellow right now, right?
Yeah. So these ones aren't meant to make us tired, although they can if you wear them all day and you don't get any time outside. Yeah. But they're just meant to protect our eyes from blue light during the day, from whether it's screens or light coming through a window. And then at night, we want to have extra protection that really just makes us more tired more quickly.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, We'll get into that more in detail. Give us a little of your background, Matt. People don't know who you are. Tell us who you are, where you're from, what's going on, what brought you here.
Well, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm 21 years old at present, and I've been in health since I was 13 because I was really struggling with a lot of different issues like gut issues, headaches, brain fog, fatigue, allergies, the whole thing. And I learned about the paleo diet when I was trying to heal some acne I was dealing with. And I didn't know that I could potentially heal all that other stuff. But when I was reading, for example, like Mark Sisson's blog, I heard about epigenetics, and then I learned that I could do significantly more with my health than I ever thought. I always thought it was all genetic. Eventually that led me to a guy named Jack Kruse, who's talking all about circadian rhythms and light. And I used this information to just try to go to the next level to see what it was worth. And sure enough, the light stuff had the biggest impact on me of everything that I had tried. Diet was very, very significant as well, but it just made a lot of sense. And so I ended up starting Raw Optics to make the glasses just because out of all the things that I had to do for optimizing light, the biggest was getting sunlight. But then the other was just avoiding bright light sources after sunset. And so the glasses that were on the market, you might have seen them. There were these big, cheap safety goggles from a company called Uvex on Amazon, and they just didn't look really good. So I wanted something that I could wear that would block the blue, but actually look great, be high quality. And so that sort of led to me having a business, but I'm still more interested in learning about and teaching about how light overall affects the body and how we can optimize our health by fixing our circadian rhythms and so on.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of data out there that sort of delves into circadian rhythm. And there does seem to be, quite a bit of information there. And clearly, I mean, we can debate about what diet humans ate. I mean, we clearly were not sitting under, fluorescent bulbs or staring at computers most of our evolution. So, I mean, there's something that this is an unnatural stimulus to us. Now, whether or not it has an impact or how big that impact, a lot of people would debate. What can you do about it? That's another thing. Are the glasses making a difference? And I'm aware of Jack Kruse and some of his work. And I certainly, and I'm glad you point out that you feel that diet has a role, because when people sort of say, well, light is the only thing we need to worry about. And, I think sleep's kind of important. I think diet's kind of important. I think exercise is kind of important too. So this is another component. And is it the component? Can we say that I can be a fat guy eating junk food and not getting sleep, and all I got to do is put on a pair of glasses and my health is going to be perfect? I don't think you're saying that. And I don't think anybody would find you credible if you did say that. So let's talk into sort of stuff that's kind of realistic. So how does light impact us, good or bad?
Yeah. So the first place to start really is just looking at what is life as a system overall, and if we do that, we can see that we require energy to function, right? Obviously, we're animate, we're moving, we're doing all of these things. And the primary source of energy for all life on Earth is coming from the sun. And so light is very intrinsically tied to our existence. So light has powered a lot of the evolution of life directly, because all life is living outdoors under the full spectrum of light. And then it also contributes to energy that we take in through food, so food is sort of like a medium to carry light energy into our body. So in a way, all food and energy that we're taking in breaks down to light. Like when we have the electrons, whether it's in a plant or in the fat of an animal, those electrons have been excited by sunlight in the process of photosynthesis, and we can take the energy back off of them and use it as a fuel source. So that's sort of the most foundational thing, is that light really powers life. Now, the pros and the cons are that the modern light sources that we're getting today from a con standpoint don't have the full spectrum of sunlight, where when we have full spectrum sunlight, we have infrared, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and ultraviolet. And over time, our bodies have evolved to take advantage of all these different colors to do different things in the body. They're different frequencies. So, infrared and red light help optimize the water in our cells, the structure. Like you've probably heard of the fourth phase of water and how that works in our body and helps us basically channel energy and use energy in our cells. But even more data supports the evidence of red and infrared light on how mitochondria work. So there's all these companies making the red light panels now because those different wavelengths of red and infrared significantly improve the function of the mitochondria. And when you improve that, it's like the saying that a rising tide lifts all ships. Since every cell has mitochondria, if we can just improve them, we'll be able to work better. So, and that's just the red component. If you get into, blue has the impact of setting our circadian rhythm throughout, sunrise and sunset and throughout the day. Violet and ultraviolet in particular really has a lot of benefits because it's very high powered light. It's often mistakenly, shared that ultraviolet causes skin cancer. I don't believe that that's really the case. It can definitely contribute in an individual who's otherwise unhealthy and not being, exercising caution with their sun exposure. But it's not really based. The evidence doesn't support that sunlight causes skin cancer. Anyhow, ultraviolet has been shown to improve. Obviously, vitamin D levels is one of the most important things, which is basically essential for our immune system to function properly, for our bone metabolism to work. So that's just a few of the different things that light does in our body. Ultraviolet light through our eye has been linked or is related to the production of key neurotransmitters and hormones. So for example, like serotonin is produced upon the stimulus of light on the eyes from tryptophan, and then that can be converted into melatonin upon sufficient amounts of darkness in the evening. And so if we don't have light, a huge amount of things in the body are functioning at a significantly lower level. And then conversely, the modern lights we have today are just basically bathing us in a much larger proportion of blue, which when it's in the sun is balanced by the more healing red and infrared light, specifically near infrared. But when we are under LEDs and fluorescent lights and screens, the blue, which is in very large quantities, isn't balanced by near infrared. So it begins to become significantly more oxidative. It produces a lot more reactive oxygen species in the mitochondria. And that's why it's, pretty important to block blue light, not just from our eyes, but also from our skin. In other words, you wouldn't want to be like shirtless bathing under fluorescent lights, especially at night, because it has this effect on our mitochondria. But again, conversely, if we just go outside, we're really like sort of filling up our cup from a light standpoint.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a difference, seasonally. This is pure anecdotally, but I always kind of feel better when it comes spring, and you're kind of, maybe you get more exposure to light. Maybe there's just a reason you just kind of feel better. And I was just recently. Interestingly, I'm in Southern California. The last couple of days I was up in Northern California in San Francisco, and there's not as much light. There's, just because of the latitude difference, there's less light. And it just seems like people who are less happy there. I don't know if there's something to it or not, or if I'm sure it impacts your mood. And I do, certainly don't disagree that the sun is a source of all energy and therefore life. And that makes perfect sense. What about modifying the light we're exposed to outside of, because as you mentioned, our skin. So I can't wear blue blocker glasses on my skin. I mean, I can cover my eyes, but are there lights that are produced that are more in line with actual sunlight that you can make, or is that impossible to make? Is there some? I'm sure that the fluorescent lights depend on a certain type of gas, and it's only going to vibrate at a certain frequency and emit a certain amount of light. But is there any thought or anybody coming out there with, hey, we're going to make lights that simulate sunlight? Is that doable? It may already exist. I don't know. Or is it maybe too expensive?
Yeah, no, it's totally doable, and it's actually something that we're looking into as a company to really bring commercially in a way that's aligned with the science. So before I'd say the last 20 years, there weren't many options. Even there, back in the 70s, there was a researcher named John Ott who was studying the health effects of lights, and he was able to procure some full spectrum, or what they call full spectrum fluorescent lights. So they had certain combination, like you said, of gases that when they're excited by that electricity, they're re-emitting more of a full spectrum, including some ultraviolet and infrared. But I've done a lot of looking and have not been able to find those. So it seems like they haven't been produced in a long, long time. They were for very specific purposes with plants and all kinds of different things. And so it's really something where it can definitely be done. And if there's enough demand, it can be done at a reasonable cost. So the demand is really starting to be there. So yes, there are lights that can be made. We're working on making them. As far as right now, if people just wanted to get lights that are better for health than what's being mostly used, like most often people are using compact fluorescent lights and LEDs. And these are often cool white, compact fluorescent, and LEDs. Cool white is the best way to describe cool white versus warm white is if you're ever driving out on the street and you see those cars with the new headlights, they're like bright white and they completely blind you. I don't see them because I always wear my glasses when I'm driving, but if I take them off, it's blinding. And so that's cool white LEDs. And then warm white is just that more yellowish color of like an older car headlight. So anyway, the ones that are cool, the bright white, they're more bothersome on our eyes and our sleep and circadian rhythms and everything, but they just have significantly more blue. That's like what the iPhone screen and a computer screen is when you don't have any night mode or any filters on it. It's just a bright white. So instead of using those lights, the fluorescents and the LEDs, what people can do is get, for example, like halogen lights. Like a 12-volt halogen lamp is basically the simplest, most safe of all the light sources that you can buy. But you can also get incandescents, which are significantly better than any of the other lights out there. LEDs and fluorescents are significantly less bad, I should say. The only thing is, like, California right now on this crusade for, sort of environmentalism, which I don't disagree with, taking care of the environment, but they have they've outlawed the use of incandescent bulbs. So you can't even have Amazon ship them to you. They won't even ship to California. So you'd have to get, if I was living in California, I would go to Nevada or Arizona just to pick up incandescent bulbs. And you even have to have LEDs to pass inspection or something like that, or fluorescence, but you could just swap them all out. So that's what I recommend to people, just getting simple incandescents. If you can get lights that are generally like a little bit on the dimmer side, like less bright, you don't want to use dimmer switches. That's a separate issue because dimmer switches both emit a ton of EMF at the switch because they splice the current in a certain way. And then they also cause the light bulbs to flicker significantly more. So there's two issues with lights. There's the spectrum and the colors it's emitting, and then the flicker. A lot of these bulbs actually have a flicker that we can't visually see, but it's constantly sort of stressing out our brain. So avoid dimmer switches and use just incandescent bulbs. The ones people can use if they want just nighttime lights are like the Edison bulbs. So if you can get the Edison ones, not the LED knockoff versions, but the ones where you see the filament, those are dim, but they look great. They're really warm. And besides that, I recommend people use candles if they really want to go sort of to the furthest they can take this, just using candles at night or that kind of thing.
Yeah, the sun's light is, the sun has a big giant burning ball of hydrogen, right? And so, is fire, obviously wood is not hydrogen, but is fire the closest we have to sunlight, or is it fairly similar, or is it more red light, or what's the deal on fire?
Well, yeah, so actually it's interesting you say wood is not hydrogen, because it actually is, from my understanding. It's just a bunch of cellulose, which is a bunch of hydrogen wrapped up on a carbon backbone. And so I always share that analogy because when we burn, a piece of log, it's basically, putting on a spark, and the spark causes hydrogens to break free. And then those hydrogens react with oxygen in the air, and that releases more energy and makes water. And that released energy perpetuates the reaction. So fire, once you have an initial spark, it can just keep going because it feeds itself. as long as there's fuel of hydrogen and oxygen. So the cool thing is we do the same in our mitochondria. This is why, the light becomes so relevant, whether we're talking about diet or we're talking about exercise or we're talking about mental health or human optimization. Our cellular engines that power our entire life are literally taking hydrogen fuel, whether using carbohydrate or fat, stripping hydrogens, putting them onto NADH or FADH, and then reacting them with oxygen at the end of the electron transport chain to make water and release energy in the same way a fire does. So anyway, that's a separate discussion, but there's more of a tangent, but the point is, so fire does emit a pretty comprehensive spectrum from the infrared side of the equation. So from infrared to red, orange, and yellow, fire is pretty full spectrum, but it doesn't have green, blue, violet, and ultraviolet, because as far as I understand, once the electrons have been basically captured, or the light energy has been captured on those electrons in photosynthesis, it's slowed down, so to speak. So in other words, the green, blue, and violet that plant was taking in the process of photosynthesis, that light energy has been slowed down. And when you re-emit it, it's being re-emitted as red and infrared. So that's the best way to put it. It is a great light source, especially for night, because it doesn't have any blue light. So it's a great option for people.
Yeah, a couple of comments. So, you talked about the flickering lights, particularly the fluorescent lights, and many of us have been aware, we've seen a bulb that's flickering and stuff, but there's that very high cycle flickering that we may not consciously be aware of. And, within the sort of autistic community, I have an autistic son, very high functioning, but those lights can be, and you say it stresses the brain out. I think some folks with autism tend to be particularly hypersensitive to that sort of phenomenon. So it is pretty interesting. So I want to ask you, the theoretical stuff sounds, it's, it's certainly interesting and fascinating, but let's talk about, is there any data out there that shows that exposure to certain light objectively harms us in some way? Is there is there studies that saying, hey, if you're exposed to extra blue light inappropriately, at night or something, does it raise our blood glucose? Does it increase inflammatory markers? What's out there that would dictate that, hey, this is maybe a problem besides sounding woo-woo and that type of stuff? Is there any sort of data out there that could show us that there's a problem?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up. I like more often than the theoretical to bring it down to the realistic stuff and the clinical evidence, especially for the folks who really want to see that. And I'm one of those folks. So yeah, there are studies I've read that show how blue light at night actually can increase and basically negatively affect our blood glucose. So that is one that just a simple PubMed search people can pull up. But that's one thing. The bigger issues really, in my opinion, are the studies that show very clearly that blue light can suppress melatonin. So basically, blue light exposure hits these cells in our eye called the retinal ganglion cells. So we have the rods, the cones, and then we have intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, as they call them. It's a very much longer name. But anyhow, these retinal ganglion cells, they're only specifically sensitive to blue light wavelengths. So basically, in other words, these are cells that aren't like the rods and cones. They're not going to the visual centers to help us create images and so on. They're going straight to the hypothalamus, the master regulator of our metabolism, and basically of the entire body's metabolism, and basically saying, is it day or is it night? And so our body's able to time our sleep and wake cycles around this based on this circadian rhythm. Also timing a lot of other things like, for example, appetite, excretion, activity, the production of protein synthesis in our muscles and so on is all timed by our circadian rhythm. So point being, blue light at night, simply put, through the eye and through the skin to a lesser extent, but mainly through the eye, does cause melatonin's suppression. And so melatonin is the master antioxidant. There's a lot of data showing how melatonin is one of the most important antioxidants in the body, especially for repairing our engines, our mitochondria, because when we're awake and we're producing energy, it's just like any engine, it generates some smoke, essentially. It's a little bit inefficient. And this smoke is the free radicals that happen in the mitochondria, the reactive oxygen species. So melatonin can scavenge these oxidative molecules and help repair the mitochondrial DNA and also repair our nuclear DNA. And melatonin actually has a massive list of other things it's linked to improve, lowering risks of atherosclerosis, having positive effects on body weight. Melatonin is linked to so many different things. And so the data is clear that blue light suppresses it, and the data is clear that melatonin is very important, and having lower melatonin levels is an issue. So that for me is sufficient to really be careful and cautious with excess blue light exposure at night, just because it's throwing off our most simple and fundamental timekeeping system in our body that regulates pretty much every single thing in the body, including our genes and so on. So anyway, that's blue light, especially at night. There's evidence that shows that during the day, blue light exposure can be causing increased reactive oxygen species, in other words, irrespective of time. So if we're in the sun, based on, the research that I've done and what's out there, the risk is significantly diminished from blue light because of the infrared that's there. So I wouldn't recommend people wear these glasses out in the sun. I specifically say do not wear these in the sun. But anyway, so that's all about artificial light. There's definitely more we could get into, but that's a start. As far as sunlight goes, there is a lot of data showing that sun is actually essential for optimal health, obviously for vitamin D levels. There's good data showing that, and again, this is something people will debate tooth and nail if they run or work with a supplement company, but there's good evidence showing that supplemental vitamin D does not compare in its efficacy to vitamin D that's produced the proper way. Not to mention that even if you do supplement vitamin D, you're still deficient in basically hundreds or thousands of other effects that the sun has on the body. But anyway, there was a really good study that was completed in 2017 that evaluated, nitric oxide. Actually, someone just commented, that's another thing. Sun causes the release, UVA light causes nitric oxide to be released in our blood vessels, causing them to expand, reducing blood pressure and all that, which is amazing. And that's why the skin will turn pink, because the blood comes up to the surface. It's called dermal pooling, so that the blood, and this is something that's a little bit further out there, but that the blood can actually be irradiated by the light and assimilate the light. Anyway, the point is this study from Sweden evaluated these women, about 20,000 women, for a very long time. I don't know the exact duration, but it was a very large portion of their lives, several decades, for the things that are most contributing to all-cause mortality. And they found that of all the factors that they evaluated, which was everything from smoking cigarettes or not, to sunlight exposure, to diet, to relationships, to stress levels, to did they have kids or not, basically showed that sunlight exposure, the lack of sunlight exposure, was one of the most powerful determiners of, are they living long, healthy lives, or are they dying early of all kinds of diseases? In other words, decreased sunlight exposure increased risk for all-cause mortality very significantly. And that's just one of many studies showing that sunlight is essential for the body to work. And they put it on the magnitude of basically avoiding sunlight is as big of a risk factor for health as smoking cigarettes in that particular study. You get the idea. There's a lot of clinical data and research and field data and real life data beyond the theoretical of how sun is important and all this stuff.
Yeah, and I'm aware of quite a bit of the research about sunlight exposure being beneficial, and I agree that I don't think that sunlight is a primary driver of cancers, even skin cancer. It's a conditionally dependent thing. If you're already compromised in a way, it can sort of exacerbate that, but it's not the primary cause. So we have people that live in all different types of sun environment. We have people that live, in the tropics, and we have people that live in the polar climates. Very different sunlight exposure. How do they compensate? I mean, is there, and one of the things I'd say, people in the cold climates probably eat a different diet than people in the warmer climates, and maybe there's other things that go on. Maybe there's difference in exercise. How is there a way to tie that in, to say, hey, these people are lacking in, sufficient sunlight exposure, or they have a different sunlight exposure to these people. I'm not going to call it sufficient. It's just different. Mm-hmm. And they've sort of adapted a certain way. Is there any thought to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just from my own research and experience, what becomes really obvious is that, obviously in nature, there were different civilizations who were exposed to very little sun for much of the year. And then there were civilizations that got a ton of sun throughout the year. The interesting thing is that although the strength of the sun varies, the hours of sunlight is actually the same everywhere on Earth. And that was a bit shocking to me when I realized it, but it's just depending on where you are on Earth. On the equator, it's 6 hours of day, or I should say 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. every day of the year, whereas at the North Pole, it's 24 hours of day at one time of the year and 24 hours of night at another. So it's just, as far as the number of hours of light exposure, everyone on Earth is exactly the same. So that being said, the people who lived at northerly latitudes, as far as we can tell historically, enjoyed pretty robust health, probably significantly better than the majority of people in our society today. I mean, I'm talking Norwegians, Siberians, Russians, even Northern Europeans living in Germany and France and, Poland and so on. Like, these are places where, for many people, if we didn't have the modern conveniences of heating and so on, we couldn't even imagine. I mean, we think about it, like, we couldn't imagine living in a place like that in the winter. I mean, we're talking sub-freezing for 3 months straight, and people literally lived out in that temperature. So I believe that as a species, and I'm sure you guys share this agreement here, but basically that we were so much more robust back in our heyday as far as our ability to withstand the environment. Like, you look at a guy like Wim Hof, able to withstand the cold. I believe that was sort of just the default for anyone living in a northerly latitude. The point of me saying that is because these people lived outdoors all the time, they got more than enough light. We often will conflate strong, direct sunlight on a summer day where it feels warm on your skin with sunlight. And it's not the same thing. One's just strong summer sunlight and the other is sunlight. But the point is, even light coming through a cloud is having very beneficial effects on the body, getting us a lot of the wavelengths we need. And especially if we're connected to nature, living outdoors, on almost everywhere on the planet, even in Norway, there is a sunrise and a sunset every day to help our circadian rhythm timing be accurate. So, again, you go past like the Arctic Circle, then you're pretty much at permanent night for at least a little period, but very few people live that far north. So like, I have friends who live in Norway at the 62nd latitude, and on the shortest day of the year, the sun would rise maybe at 9 or 9:30 and set around 2:30 or 3. So they still had 5 or so hours of sunlight, 2/3 of the way almost to the North Pole. So that all being said, I want to shy people away from thinking they need to be like out sunbathing. It's really just important to be getting sunrise and sunset to set the circadian rhythm so our body can observe that seasonal fluctuation throughout the year, especially if you live that far from the equator. And also just getting out with some frequency in the winter. But the real important thing is that we can get out in the summer, because there is lots of light still, even in Norway in the summer, build up our vitamin D stores in our fat, and we can actually be able to take advantage of those vitamin D stores throughout the winter. But again, in the modern world, for many reasons, poor diet, lack of nutrients, and then lack of sunlight on top of that, cellular dehydration because of all kinds of other things happening, EMF and all sorts of other things, people can't make vitamin D necessarily as well. So, there's all sorts of things that can affect that process. High mercury, high metals can affect our ability to make vitamin D. So you get the idea. Like, we have to get a lot of things right to be able to make vitamin D efficiently. But if we're healthy, we're eating a clean diet. And I do believe, the carnivore diet is practically the best out there as far as keeping our deuterium levels low and keeping our, body cranking at a good level. I think people should be able to do pretty well if they just get their summer sunlight, and then they'll be good for most of the winter. And just one more thing, people in Finland, Sweden, Norway, I mean, Finland especially, they created the Finnish sauna where they just cook themselves with hot air, basically. And that is giving their cells back. It's not getting the ultraviolet component, which isn't present as much in the winter. It's getting a lot of red and infrared. And so that is helping support the system in big ways. We can also take advantage of, from what I've studied, cold thermogenesis is really beneficial in the winter, sort of as a supplement to sunlight, because it activates the mitochondria and so on. Being cool, having cool skin allows our skin to better assimilate the light that's present. Just like, imagine being super hot in the sun on a hot day, not really being able to just soak it in, whereas you just went in the ocean and it just warms you up and it feels so good. That sort of thing is applicable in the winter. And then this is a little bit more, I'd say, out there as far as the clinical data goes, but I do believe that consumption of good quality seafood that's going to be low in metals is another really great thing. I don't know where you guys stand with the carnivore diet and consumption of things like sardines and so on, but that omega-3 DHA can really benefit our body in a wintry climate by giving us more of that, basically that fat that helps us to assimilate light when we put it into our cell membranes and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we're totally fine with seafood for sure. And then we've got, and we've got an interesting guest coming on talking about seafood in the near future. But let me ask you about, quote unquote, the third eye or the pineal gland. A lot of people, many people haven't heard of that. That's what it's kind of called. What is it? It's deep in the brain. It has a role in the light dark cycle. Can you tell us anything about the pineal gland? Or
Yeah, of course. It's so funny you asked that. Have you heard of a guy named Dr. Joe Dispenza?
I have heard the name. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just at he's a big, meditation proponent, he's a big proponent of the mind body connection. He is all about the pineal gland and connecting with it. And I was just at one of his week-long advanced retreats. So whatever I knew about the pineal gland, my knowledge was doubled in the last week. But anyway, the pineal it sits above our thymus in our brain. The location's less relevant, but it's basically considered the third eye for the reason that as some theories go, it was previously external earlier at different points in our evolution, that the pineal gland actually may very well have been like certain salamanders or lizards will have, or chameleons. They'll have some sort of like a bit of a dot between their eyes on their forehead that basically senses different things going on in the environment. So that is the idea there. Now, as far as I understand the pineal gland, the main component of what it does is it produces melatonin. I mean, this is just basic fact in the research. The pineal gland, one of its main roles is to produce this master antioxidant melatonin. And so when we suppress our melatonin levels through blue light, this is where the effect is happening. It's the stimulus is going from the eyes into the brain, into the hypothalamus, but the pineal gland is basically not able to function as well. Now, a little more on the woo-woo side, but there's a lot of accounts of in ancient India and China, they would practice this practice of sun gazing. In other words, watching the sunrise and sunset, because they believed from their experience that it significantly heightened the function of our eyes, of our brain, of our metabolism. And many of them postulated that it has to do with activating the third eye, the pineal gland. So again, from a more woo-woo standpoint, it's considered sort of the seat of our intuition, the seat of our soul, and our ability to connect with energy that is beyond our typical five senses. That's what the pineal gland is often associated with. But again, as far as the medical literature and so on, it's pretty straightforward. Like the pineal gland makes melatonin. It is a key component in the regulation of our light and dark cycles. And you guys are probably familiar with the tattoo a lot of people get, which is the Eye of Horus. It's actually the logo we have on these glasses you can see. But that's a very common tattoo and symbol and so on. But anyway, that is actually an Egyptian cross-section of the pineal gland, which really surprised me because I had picked it as a logo well before I knew that. But when you actually, they would mummify and they would take the brains out and they would dissect them and so on. And when you look at the pineal gland where it sits in the brain, that's exactly what it looks like going out of the down towards the brain stem from the pineal gland. So anyway, that's what I know about the pineal gland. It's super important. And without it, we would have, not only not be able to really regulate our sleep-wake cycles as much, but we would have lowered ability to just function and connect with our environment. And for those, last thing I'll say is for those people who are interested in heightening their intuition and that sort of thing, the best evidence available does support that is sort of and this is again, anecdotal and a little bit of clinical evidence supports that pineal gland is that medium in that case, where those effects are occurring.
Yeah, and I just a couple things. So, I mean, I think the pineal gland also is involved in serotonin production and uses like tryptamine as a precursor. I guess the question is the stimulation of the pineal gland. Is it skin exposure of light, or is it still through the eye, or is it both? Do we know that?
Yeah. So the eye is the primary component, and as far as the skin, I can't say based on the data out there. But there's, in other words, the data showing that the skin has effects on the body. I should say light on the skin has effects is fairly, I'd say, primitive. I mean, it's definitely enough to show that that light has an effect on the body. But basically what they found is that the melanopsin, which is the pigment in the retinal ganglion cells that are controlling our circadian rhythm through the eye, the same pigment melanopsin was found in subcutaneous fat and skin. And therefore that led many researchers, including guys like Dr. Cruz to, therefore say, okay, the data's in, sunlight and light in general does have a very substantial effect on our skin. And the reason that's, it makes sense because we are beings of light in a way, we can say that. And our skin is one of the most exposed surfaces, really the only exposed surface besides our eye. And so it would only make sense that if we can take in sunlight through our skin and do all of these, take all of these benefits like nitric oxide and vitamin D and so on, that if we're exposed to blue light on our skin or artificial light, that it may have a similar level of effect. And one thing I would just add to that is when we're talking about taking light in, I think people often do think that they have to go out and sunbathe and take their shirt off. But in reality, just as blocking blue light from the eyes alone, even if you're not protecting your skin fully, in other words, like you don't need to protect your whole face necessarily, although it might not be a bad idea, but just having a shirt on and pants kind of does the trick for the most part. But anyhow, in that same way that protecting the eye is important, getting sunlight on our eyes is the most important place to get it, because that's controlling the signaling of the circadian rhythm, the production of these hormones and neurotransmitters and so on. So you don't necessarily have to go out and take all your clothes off, although that adds another layer of benefit.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the sun gazing, because most people, you hear that term, you think somebody's staring at the midday sun and going blind, and we're always told not to look at the sun. But we've all experienced beautiful sunrises and beautiful sunsets, probably more people sunsets than sunrise because nobody gets up early anymore. But, you've got that, and it is a pleasurable experience. It's almost hypnotic. I mean, I love when I get a chance, walking by the ocean and watch the sunset. I mean, it's just absolutely a pleasurable thing to do. And so I wouldn't doubt that, early humans didn't have a lot of entertainment. I mean, they didn't have TV to watch. They probably hung out, told stories, and watched the sunset together. They probably gathered around, and probably was quite a good time. Let's talk about, because you mentioned melatonin quite a bit. There's supplemental melatonin that people take, and that's been a big rage, and it's kind of maybe fallen out of favor. How does supplemental melatonin compare to the melatonin that we produce ourselves? Is it equivalent? Is one not completely a waste of time? What are your thoughts on melatonin supplements?
Yeah, I'm hesitant to say that it's completely a waste of time, because if someone's traveling and they are changing time zones, for example, especially flying east, so you're basically shifting your circadian rhythm, forward, or I should say backward, melatonin can be very helpful to just take a little bit to go to sleep. But just like Phil W. actually commented, it looks like in the chat box, the supplemental melatonin, just like many other supplements, can affect our body's endogenous production. And again, based on different people I've spoken with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with a guy named Dr. Chris Shade. He created Quicksilver Scientific. They make really great liposomal supplements. But even he, as a producer of these supplements, acknowledged that there is pretty solid data showing that taking exogenous things, including melatonin, will affect our body's internal production. So it's something where I would not advise it personally, except in the case of travel, and using, the simplest things people can do. And I've had people I've spoken with who have taken the light diet, as I call it, this sort of approach to our healthy light exposure, taken this, started doing a few of the pieces of it, and they started sleeping better very quickly. They started feeling better very quickly. So it's the key pieces are just watch the sunrise, spend as much time as you can outdoors during the day. And if it's freezing, maybe just get out for 30 minutes to an hour, walk if you can, or crack a window so you can let the full spectrum into your wherever room you're hanging out inside. But because the window glass does filter a decent portion of the spectrum, depending on the type of window. But anyway, sunrise, light during the day, and then sunset, and then put on blue blocking glasses after sunset, or just turn off your lights and use candles. That is simple, and it can have a very positive impact for people to really start to improve their melatonin production.
Yeah, and I see Phil bringing this up, and I was about to bring this up anyway, Phil, but the diet, you have a light diet. So is the light diet a diet of light, or is it a diet of food?
It's a diet of light. Yeah, no, I stay away from food. So it's not, it's not my area of expertise, food. I mean, I've learned a bunch. I've learned a lot about deuterium. I've learned a lot about omega-3s, and so on. But I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the field. And not to mention, it's like, soon as you go into the food territory, people just go after you. People just start, getting very excited. And so I'm happy to be able to focus mostly on light exposure. because there's less disagreement and so on. And I think the reason there's less disagreement, kind of like you said, is earlier on in the podcast, is like we could guess all day long and speculate about what humans ate. Now, obviously, there's very sufficient evidence that we were more carnivorous and so on. And I'm significantly more toward, in that direction personally. But anyhow, you get the idea. But as far as light goes, it's like there's really very little disagreement. There's really no room for debate that we all lived outside before we built homes, whether you were in a cave or a teepee or wherever you were living outdoors. So anyhow, the light diet, as I call it, it isn't about, so a common misconception people will say is, so you're you're a breatharian, you're only eating sunlight. And I'm like, no, I still eat food. But anyhow, so the light diet's 8 steps, and simply put, I just listed the first 3 of them. It's basically sleep with the sun. So, the components of this are not eating a lot of food within 3 to 4 hours of sleep because of the evidence of how that affects our circadian rhythm and our body's ability to repair itself. So stopping, cutting off, eating around 5 or so, 6 in the evening, depending summer or winter. You would also want to watch the sunset and then wear blue light blocking glasses after sunset. So that all kind of encompasses in the first step. It's sort of the nighttime piece of the light diet. Second step is watch the sunrise. And that basically is how we set our circadian rhythm. So that is very important. And I recommend everyone watch the sunrise every day for about 15 minutes from when it comes over the horizon. The third step is live outdoors during the day. So like I was saying earlier, just be outside as much as you can. Don't and sunbathe amply also, but don't overdo it. Don't burn yourself. And if it's freezing cold out, as much as you can do, it's great. It's helping. And it's just good for the body. And there's plenty of evidence, very few people are going to disagree that getting outside more is going to be good for you. So anyway, step 4 of the light diet is to drink unfluoridated spring water. So when we take in light, there's many things, our skin, our eyes, and different biomolecules that are helping absorb the light and so on. So there's many different components, but water is one of the most important things in our body that's taking in light energy, and we're able to use it the light energy structures the water in our cells. There's pretty solid evidence on this from Dr. Pollack from the University of Washington. But anyway, so if we drink toxic city water with all the runoff chemicals that are there, and just there's some podcasts with water experts, of which I'm not fully one, but about the amount of nasty chemicals in municipal water that are not filtered out. Not to mention that it's being recycled often, so it's higher in deuterium. It's just kind of a mess, and it has fluoride, which is a huge issue for calcification of the pineal gland. So unfluoridated spring water, very easy to do. You can order it. You can buy it at the store. That's simple. Step 5 is to eat. This is where it touches on diet a little bit, but I just say eat a seasonal local diet that is, heavy in seafood. But if I'm getting into detail, I'd say clean seafood sources, because and again, this is where there's plenty of open room for discussion, but I'm inclined towards the theories of human brain evolution that show that we were sort of like aquatic apes, where we lived coastal and consumed a large portion of our diet in shellfish, which allowed our brain to develop with the high amount of omega-3 DHA that we see today, of which we have almost more than any other mammal, and other than dolphins, which obviously eat seafood all day. And we don't convert it very well from plant-based sources. So it's pretty clear that there was an evolutionary source. And anyway, but there's plenty other, different evidence about how we evolved. I'm careful with food, with the food communities, but you get the idea. I'm very much in agreement with the carnivore perspectives. It's so much, veganism and that whole world is just, it doesn't really make sense to me based on the evidence. So anyway, it's simple: outdoors, seasonal diet, local food, and so on. Step 6 of the light diet is to take advantage of temperature therapy. So basically cold exposure, especially in the winter, but also in the summer when the sun's hot, and using saunas, things like that. Just the heat shock proteins in the body are very important. And when we take advantage of saunas, we get to activate these systems. When we are using cold thermogenesis, we're activating the mitochondria. We're able to increase fat burning, increase leptin sensitivity. There's a lot of different things that happen when we're using cold and hot. So, and not to mention, anyone who's ever done a hot sauna and a cold plunge and done back and forth 3 times, that you probably never slept as good as you did that night, or felt as calm and like your blood vessels were so open and dilated and you just felt great. So that's step 6. Step 7 is to avoid man-made electromagnetic fields. So these include artificial light, but especially the EMF from, and this is again a full podcast worth of information, but basically the amount of data on how Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cell signals, EMF, and so on affect our cells is very shocking for those who aren't familiar with it. And of course, there's an industry-led cover-up of what the research really has been showing since the 60s and 70s, since they started researching it, and the Navy sort of stiff-armed all the research because they needed to use radar to fight the Cold War. So the main guys researching it were studying under VA money, Veterans Affairs, and so they had to shut them down. There's a really great book on that for anyone who wants more information called Going Somewhere, Truth About a Life in Science by Andrew Marino, who's one of the first researchers on EMF. But anyway, that's step 7. And step 8, to kind of tie it all up in a bow, is to cultivate our inner light. So in other words, we're doing all this external stuff. If someone is, stuck with old limiting belief systems and just completely miserable because of their past, and they're not doing work to get over that, whether it's meditation or breath work or therapy or whatever, pursuing their passion, whatever you want to say, that to me is an essential piece to have meaning, to add meaning to all the rest of it. So I often defer people to Dr. Joe Dispenza if they really want to dive deep into how to improve our inner light, so to speak, through things like meditation and breath work. But that's the full 8 steps of the light diet. Probably as brief as I've ever shared them all. So I hope people can take advantage of at least 2 or 1 or 2 or 3 of them, because any of them will have a huge benefit. And many people here probably already do half or more of these things.
I wanted to, I guess one commentary I'd make on the being outdoors in the sun, typically when most people are outdoor, they're not sedentary. I mean, I guess some people would just go sit, but I mean, most people, when you're outside, you're walking around, you're doing something, you're active. I don't know if that part of it has just as much of an effect, or if it's purely the sun exposure. Could be a combination.
It surely does. I'm sure it does, but it's got, the sun has its effects, but obviously being active also has huge effects to get, that's a conversation that doesn't need to be had. We know moving is good for us. I'd say the thing is moving uses energy. So moving under sunlight as opposed to moving under artificial light, like in a gym, is something that I would personally advocate for a lot more. Because in other words, if we're taxing our energy production systems, the mitochondria, and they're not getting the full power that they're designed to function with, we're going to be creating a lot more smoke or free radicals and reactive oxygen species. So, I'm not saying that working out in a gym is the worst thing you can do, but I really do believe people who work out in a gym could get, potentially significantly better results, and maybe even have changes in their health that they wouldn't have expected if they spent more of that time working out outdoors, where available, where possible.
Yeah, I guess I should go work out at Muscle Beach again, where it's out in the sun.
Yeah, right.
Hey, let me ask you, because we're running a little low on time, and so I want to ask you a little bit more about raw optics, and I want to ask you, so you've got these glasses. I mean, are you in the business? Is there a point where you can make prescription type glasses? Is that something you guys are set up to do? Because obviously that becomes more customized and more difficult. But tell us a little bit about the glasses themselves. What's special about them versus Blue Blocker or whoever, name the different company.
Yeah, of course. So, like I said in the beginning, I was wearing these kind of ugly safety goggles just to try to, just to block the blue light. And I was in high school, so I was going to these parties. And of course, the first thing on my mind was like, geez, I'm not going to be able to, get any girls if I'm wearing these glasses. So I, of course, was interested in how can I have the lens technology that actually is going to be blocking what needs to be blocked, but at the same time have attractive frame styles. And that's sort of when the mission began. And what we've done since then is just work with different experts in the field of optics and lenses to make it so that our lenses can block exactly what they need to block while giving us maximal color perception. So the biggest gimmick that happens in the world of blue blocking glasses today is there's these clear lenses that are sold. And basically what a clear lens tells you is that whatever's coming in the front is going out the back. That's essentially what makes something clear. And blue that affects our body in the way we're talking about is the same as visible blue. So the point is, when you remove the blue that's harmful, you're going to see a visible change in the color of the lens. It's going to become a lot more yellow like this. Even if it's half as yellow as this, that just means it's protecting about half as much of the blue light. But it's still having an effect. Whereas again, most of the lenses out there are totally transparent with a little flashy blue coating, which is meant to make people think it's blocking blue, but it's less than 5%. So that's really big. I mean, almost every company on Amazon, big companies like Felix Gray, Warby Parker, they're doing these blue flashy coatings, and they're just not having the right effect on the right wavelengths of light. If we wanted to go a little deeper, they're blocking a lot of the blue between 400 and 420 nanometers. But the thing is the LEDs that are an issue are emitting around 455 nanometers. So if you block 100% of the blue up to 420 nanometers, but nothing once you get to 455, and yet that's what our screens are emitting, and you're calling yourself a screen lens, you're either like ignorant or you're lying. And I'm not sure what it is with a lot of these companies, but that's what's happening. And it's something I hope to expose more on like a public media scale at some point. But anyhow, so we block the wavelengths where they matter from what's emitted by screens and LEDs and lights. And that's what we've done. The day lenses, like we said earlier, they block about 95% of all blue. So there's just a little bit of blue that's let through to help with vision and color perception and staying awake. But still, we're getting all the protection we need when we're inside, behind windows, on screens. Like I said before, when I go outside, I would never keep these on. I take them off because the whole idea is we want to get the sun in. So that's sort of one other way of putting it, is that the day lenses take a bright white screen, for example, or a television or a light bulb, and turn it more into like daylight of the sun. That's one maybe simpler way to think about it. And then the same thing is with our night lenses. In that same analogy, they take all these bright lights that are around us and dial the frequencies back so that they're like the color of fire. In other words, we don't let through any of the blue or the green light, just a little bit of green, again, to help with color perception, but the lowest energy of all the green in a very small percentage. And then what does pass through the night lenses, these more red lenses, it looks like Simon actually has a pair on down there, but basically it's the red, orange, and yellow colors. So the colors of fire, these don't affect melatonin in the way that the data shows blue light does and that green light can to a lesser extent. So that's really how we've made the lenses to block everything. And then the frames, we've designed them so that they're the best quality materials you can buy. And no other blue blocking company is doing this with the right blocking on the lenses and the top quality materials. So basically it's just simple. We use Italian acetate and we use German metal. And these are the two best things you can use to make a frame. So that's what we do. And we're always looking to develop our styles and potentially, like I mentioned earlier, investigating lighting products and things not too far down the future. I know you mentioned Blue Blocks. They're another company, and they do a good job. They actually got the idea to do it this way from me, but they're the only other ones who's doing a decent job, but their frames aren't on the level of our quality. And from our, development on the lenses, I don't think they have quite the technology for color perception with the lenses we have. So, and besides them, no one is even close. Like you have a couple other brands on the market that are in the health world that maybe are getting close on their lenses on blocking the right wavelengths, but their frames are oftentimes really low quality and they'll break or whatever. So that's basically the gist of it. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and there's a few that generated several questions. So people are wondering about shipping overseas, outside of the U.S., sizing options for people with fat heads and skinny heads, and then I'll ask you about the name Raw Optics. I mean, I'm assuming you're alluding to the Egyptian sun god.
Yeah.
I mean, tell us about the name and who that was, and about your, do you ship overseas? Can you customize sizes? We talked a little bit about prescriptions. So
absolutely. Yeah. I didn't mention on prescriptions. So basically for prescriptions, we can do them, but we can only do single vision, meaning like readers or distance. So readers or distance. In other words, the many people need the progressives or a bifocal. We can't do those right now. That's where it gets too custom. So if you need readers or prescription or distance, I should say, I would pick the one that you use the most when you're looking at a TV or a computer. That's the best suggestion I could give for those, or get both. I would recommend that. For people, for the lens types, people often ask, which one should I get? That's probably the most common question. I would say if you want to have the full effect, I would get both. We have a bundle where you save, I believe it's about $50 or $40 when you buy a day and a night lens together. For that reason, because everyone sort of needs both. Like I'm using this one right now, but as soon as the sun goes down and I'm going to be out with my buddy here in Austin, Texas, tonight, I'll be wearing my night lenses because I want to still go out, but I want to be really tired when I lay down and hit the pillow. But that being said, if I wanted to have a little bit more color perception, if I say tonight, you know what, we're going to be out, we're going to be seeing people, I want to see everything a little better, I would use these lenses, the day ones, and I'm still getting, the best way to put it is you're getting probably about 70% of the protection of the night lenses with these, and only about 30 to 40% of the color distortion or the color elimination. And so the day lenses are a great versatile option for both. And then I would say if someone has a sleep issue and they only want one lens, or they're just really looking to focus on their sleep and they don't spend a lot of time indoors during the day, then I would just get the night lenses because those are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Typically, those are the ones I recommend if someone only gets one pair, but I'm sort of shifting more towards the day lenses because the night lenses are just, they make you really tired, especially if you're getting your sunlight in the morning. So anyway, prescriptions we do, those are the lenses, and we ship internationally. We have a great software where you pay your duties and taxes on our site ahead of time so that you don't have to deal with all the headaches of paying those once they get to the post office and so on. So it ends up costing a little bit more upfront, but it's a lot less of a headache. And we have really great rates with FedEx for shipping internationally. So you get them fast. It's not like the USPS where it just will probably never show up a lot of the times when you ship with, you know, the National Postal Service. So anyhow, yeah, so that's for international. We use FedEx. Within the US, we use USPS because they're very reliable at home. Because of COVID, they can't function overseas. So I'd say, does that answer most of the questions?
I think
raw optics.
Yeah, one more. I'd say. I mean, I assume red light. You know, the evening glass is not recommended for driving, I would assume.
Well, so I think I should probably be more careful about that one than I am. But personally, I use them when I drive. I learned how to drive using these lenses because I've been wearing them for 6-7 years. So, yes. In order to protect myself, I would say if you're going to drive at night, use the day lenses because they're totally fine. But legally in the United States, you can wear whatever you want when you're driving, based on what the research I've done and people we've spoken to. So people could wear their night lenses while driving, but especially if you haven't been wearing them for a long time, it does reduce the amount of light coming into your eyes and the color perception. So I wouldn't advise it unless you're seasoned. And in other words, use the day lenses. You're still getting, like I said, about 70% of the protection with only 30 to 40% of the colors being eliminated. So totally fine. Someone asked about sizes, just to keep it simple. It's funny. Someone said eating only meat and wearing red glasses. I'm on the spectrum of not normal behavior. I love that. But so as far as sizes go, we have about 6 styles. We're going to have a 7th really soon, or it's either 5 coming up on 6. But anyhow, I try to keep it simple so that people don't have to think too much when they're picking, because it can be easy to get caught in the decision process. At least that's how I am. So we have a couple bigger styles. If people are on our website, there's one called Maxwell and there's another called Pop, which is the one that Sean's wearing. And I mean, I'm assuming, Sean, you have a pretty decently sized head and it fits very well. So Maxwell and Pop are larger. This frame, Clyde and again, Pop are more medium sized. And then there's a style called Fritz and Nate, which are a bit smaller, but also again, they I have a pretty average size head and all of them fit me pretty well. It's just, do I want one a little bigger? Some people like their frames bigger because it's in style. Some people like them smaller because it was in style, and some places it still is. So it's hard to keep up on what's in style, but that's what we're trying to do, is make them all available. And the name Ra Optics, like you said, we're alluding to the Egyptian god Ra. So I was thinking I had actually seen a post from this guy I mentioned, Dr. Cruz, who was someone I learned a lot of these things from. I'm not saying I agree with all of his perspectives about, different things, but definitely learned a lot about circadian biology and light from him and mitochondria. And there was a post that said Ra on it, like Ra something. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. It was like, Ra is my ma, like my mother. And I was like, okay, cool. Like the sun, it's kind of a joke meme. But Ra was resonating in my head. And when the business started to occur, I was like, oh, Ra, like that's a powerful, very powerful vocal emanation. And so, Ra wasn't just the god of sunlight, but also of medicine, healing, and some other things. And so I figured, wow, that works really well. Am I just going to call it Ra, or Ra glasses, Ra vision, and Ra optics just sort of fit? And another way to put it is Ra means natural light and so on. And optics means light, or raw means the sun and optics means light. So it's like sunlight, raw optics is sort of like my way I came up with it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it. One of the things, I think we talked about this maybe offline, about maybe you being able to set up a little affiliate discount code for our Meter X members. That's okay. So we'll get that on the website if we haven't already. I can't remember if we have or not. We'll have to get that hooked up with it.
Yeah, I mean, we could do, like, for example, 15% off, and set up the whole thing with you, but 15% off for the audience. So that'll be whatever the code would be. It'll be rawoptics.com. We'll make a link, and that way we can have some better viewing on the tracking and data and everything. But basically rawoptics.com / for example, like Meet RX.
Meet RX would be perfect. Yeah.
Perfect.
We'll set that up for you guys.
Perfect. We'll put in the show notes. But
where can we find you on social media, and in rawoptics.com, I guess, and where do we find you on social media?
Yeah, so rawoptics.com for the glasses, and then for the light diet, for me, it's just The Light Diet on Instagram. And pretty soon, for people who are interested, I'm going to be putting out a bit of a more comprehensive course that's going to be free for people to get. So just going through each of those steps, a little more detail, a little more of the science and the reasoning behind them. And I think that would be really useful for people who want to learn more about this. For me, my passion is how to learn more about the subject and teach, kind of like you're doing, with MeatRx and with Carnivore and everything. So the product business just kind of happened. And so I just had to go with it for a while, but I'm looking to expand.
Perfect. All right. Well, Matt, appreciate the chat. Good luck to you. And like I said, we'll definitely try to, get some folks headed your way to check that out. I think it's worth at least investigating and see what it does for you. And I think you're right. I've tried the red light glasses before, and it definitely does make you sleepy at night. So it is a sleep aid, I'd say, for sure. There's no doubt about it. Thanks
so much, Sean, for your work and for getting people aware of just the many things that are wrong with the way people are eating.
There's a lot of things we do wrong. We have to turn that around. All right, folks. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good weekend. If not, take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.